Hey, what's up? My name is Chris Pennington, and welcome to Learn Astro. This course attempts to package together all the knowledge I've gained in working with Astro over the last several years. I first started working with Astro building sites in the early betas, and I've tracked all the way through until today. Now, when I was packaging this course together, I had a few different options. Number one, I could put together something that used a very specific tech that I happen to like. So I could choose specific third-party vendors and then show you how to use this database solution with Astro. I could also use different frameworks like sticking with React a lot or using Vue or Svelte. Or what I could do is package together all the fundamentals so that you can choose whatever tech stack you want. And that's really what I've tried to do in this course. Because of that, I've really tried to make it a comprehensive course so that when you're done with the course, you can actually build using your preferred tech stack because you understand all the hooks and availabilities in Astro. Now, what we're going to do is slowly progress through this course. I'll start with a very slow introduction. I've actually got a quicker video for those of you who are already familiar with UI frameworks. And then as we move through the course, my plan is to speed up a little bit in the teaching speed. My goal is to make you very comfortable working with Astro. Now, a lot of it is going to take your work actually putting it into practice. Now, there are a couple different ways that people like to approach learning courses. You can either follow directly along with me and code right after me. You could watch it and then try to do it yourself later in your own style, or you could just get a sense of the final project, try to build it out yourself, and then watch what I do later. Depending on your learning style, you may find one better than the other. Whatever you do, I'd encourage you to make it your own. Even if it's just a small tweak as you go through a lesson, adding a little section or adding some extra HTML or CSS or one little extra Astro feature, the more you can customize the experience, the more you'll actually be learning instead of just regurgitating or following me as I type. If you have any questions, you can always check out the Discord. Thanks again so much for purchasing Learn Astro. I trust you'll really enjoy it. Happy coding. Well, just before you jump in, I want to talk a little bit about assumptions and then a few helps that you can get along the way as you work through the course. First of all, my assumptions are that you have a basic understanding of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, where possible, I'm going to try to provide a lot of the CSS for you and even provide links to the JavaScript where you might need it. That way we can focus again on kind of the core experience of Astro. Occasionally, I will dip into some UI frameworks just to show you how those work, like React. We'll also be using TypeScript, mainly just to kind of get some type safety and helps as you use components, so nothing really complex with TypeScript. But if you have a basic understanding of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, then we're starting with the same foundation. Secondly, as you work through the course, each lesson with an associated branch in GitHub will be linked below the lesson. You can also just go to the course files on my GitHub, find the lesson that you need, and then download that code. So by doing that, you'll be able to sync with whatever I've done at the end of that lesson. If you have any questions, you can always reach out on the Discord, which you'll find in the next section of the course. Now, you can, of course, just simply ask questions and interact with the community there. If, however, you find something in the course that's no longer up to date with Astro, I'm trying to keep things up to date, but I can't rewatch my course every time something comes out. So if you find something that you don't think matches what's currently available in Astro, if you could just find the needs updating channel and add a comment there, that will allow me to update the video as I'm able. My goal is to keep this thing as up to date as possible as Astro continues to progress, even adding new modules as I'm able to. Well, thanks so much. I can't wait to see how this helps you learn Astro, and I'll catch you in the next video. In this very first video, I just want to talk a little bit about what makes Astro special. Now, I'm assuming if you're watching this video, and especially if you've purchased the course, that you don't need a lot of convincing, but still, I think it's important just to verify why this is worth our time. Astro is a versatile modern web framework for creating fast, content-focused websites. At least that's how it started, but the team just pushes updates at an unbelievable speed. The thing I love most about Astro is it starts simple, as in you're just writing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and that's exactly what it feels like. But very quickly, you've got this progressive power where you can add additional layers of complexity as you need them, but it's kind of like just-in-time complexity. Rather than giving you everything you could ever possibly use and shipping that to the client, like single-page applications, instead what you do is just use the platform. You use the web, and then when you need more complexity, you can selectively grab it when you need it. And it gets complex. You can do middleware, you can have dynamic JSON endpoints. There's a bunch of really cool stuff you can do with Astro. Now, there's 5 particular reasons why I think Astro stands out and why it might be the best choice for your next project. First of all, it's content focused. Most web developers that are building sites are building content focused sites. That's not to say that people aren't building apps. Of course they are. But a lot of sites are content focused. And even if you have an app, you almost always also have some kind of content that's the majority of what you're building. Astro is specifically designed for content-rich websites like marketing sites and blogs, portfolios, documentation sites, anything like that. Now, this is one of the most important differences to understand about Astro. Astro's unique focus on content lets Astro make trade-offs and deliver unmatched performance features that wouldn't make sense for other, more application-focused web frameworks to implement. Secondly, it's server first. What I mean by that is that Astro prioritizes server rendering. That can either be ahead of time for the build or actually using server-side rendering. Now, this results in a faster website performance compared to client-side rendering. Now, that doesn't mean you can't run client-side code. It's just that Astro ships no client-side JavaScript by default. And the separation of concerns is super clear. Anything in the front matter section of an Astro file is run on build or on the server. Anything below that is then run on the client. Now, it gets a little bit more complex or powerful than that, and that you can actually pull in basically any UI framework you want. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then you can hydrate that with JavaScript when you want to, either when it's visible or on page load or when the site is done loading everything else it needs. That's called Astro Islands. Now, thirdly, it's fast by default. With Astro, building a slow website is honestly nearly impossible. It combines a content focus with this server-first approach to deliver exceptional performance. Fourthly, it's easy to use. I've mentioned this already a few times, but you don't need to be an expert to use Astro. If you know how to write HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, Astro is the perfect place to start. However, if you know more and you have more complex needs, it supports a bunch of things like the popular UI component frameworks like we've already talked about, like React and Preact and Svelte and Vue and much more. It also offers its own .astro UI language, which is easy to learn and has features borrowed from other UI frameworks. Finally and fifthly, it's fully featured but flexible. Astro comes with all the essential features for website development, including component syntax, routing, asset handling, build processes, bundling, and data fetching. Additionally, it offers more than 100 integrations for extending its capabilities and supports various UI frameworks using that Astro Island syntax. Now, I hope you can tell that I'm a big fan of Astro, and I think you will be too once you start building with it. Honestly, I think it should be the default web framework for any modern web developer. Unless you're building super complex front-end apps that require a ton of client-side routing, I don't know why you wouldn't choose Astro, and I hope to convince you of that throughout this course. This very first module is intended for somebody brand new to frameworks. Now, that's not saying if you've used React or something like that, it won't be helpful to you, but just so you know, I've intentionally kind of geared it to that level. We'll talk about the structure of an Astro project, how to use layouts, how to pass content between different components, how to build small components and kind of componentize your builds. We'll talk about CSS. We'll talk about JavaScript, about where stuff is scoped, where items are run, whether it's on server or on the actual client. And I'll drop in a few other items as we go. The ninth and final lesson here will actually build out a custom card component so you get to put into practice what we've been doing all along. Now, throughout the time, I'll actually pause and ask you to do things. When I ask you to do that, I'd really encourage you to pause and test your knowledge. I hope as I explain it, it sounds easy, but it's actually you doing it that's what cements that in stone. Now, finally, before we get going, and this will be the case for all the lessons, if you're ever interested in the finished code for a branch, all you have to do is go to GitHub, grab that code, hit the download button, and then open it up in your code editor. If you ever get stuck, you're welcome to do that. I'll see you in the next video. I hope you're ready to get started with Astro. Before I jump in, I do want to mention that I have a fast-paced version of this that's about 27 minutes. That way you'll get all the core basics a lot quicker if you're already used to working with front-end UI frameworks like React or Vue or Svelte. So if you're familiar with those, I would recommend starting there. If you say, I'm not very familiar with them, or I want to kind of take a slower paced version, then that's what I've got these lessons for. We're going to slowly go through everything you need to know to get started with the basics of Astro. I should mention before you get started, you do need to make sure that you have a Node version on your machine that Astro currently supports. So if I come over here to the installation, which I'll make sure to link below, you'll see that this is what's required as of 5.0 and higher, but you may be watching this later. So just go ahead and check to make sure that whatever you have on your machine for Node is also something that works with Astro. If you don't know how to do that, you can come over here and just check the Node version, and you just, again, want to make sure that this matches. Now, again, if you need Node, you can go to nodejs.org, just download the LTS version, and that should get you up and running. Just install it like any other program, and then jump right back into the tutorial. Okay, so once you've got that, you can go ahead and start a new project, and I'm going to do that with the npm create astro at latest command. I'm going to give it the name Astro Course Files because that's what I personally want to name it. You don't have to name it. You can actually do that throughout this installation process if you want to. Let's go ahead and choose the basic minimal starter, and I'll install the dependencies and initialize a new Git repository. This is one of the things I really like about Astro is it makes it really nice and easy to get up and running with the CLI. It asks you all the questions, installs everything for you, and you're set and ready to go. Okay, just like that, I can just cd into Astro Course Files. Now that I'm in the directory, I can go ahead and open this up with the code command. I've got VS Code open on the left and I've got Chrome open on the right. Let me just go ahead and start this with npm run dev. Now, if that code doc command didn't work for you, it's possible on macOS that you need to install something. If I do Command-Shift-P, I can just search for path, and it's shell command install code command in path. So make sure you've done that first. That allows you to use that code command to open up whatever current directory you're in VS Code. Okay, so now we've got this over this way. Let me zoom this out because that's way too zoomed in, and you can see this basic starting point. Now, in the very next video, we're going to talk through the structure of an Astro project, but I want to make sure that you have the Astro extension installed. It's right here, language support for Astro. This is really important for IntelliSense. It gives you helpful imports, a bunch of other stuff. So you want to make sure you've got that installed, and I'll try to remember to link that down below as well. Okay, in the next video, we're going to talk about the structure of an Astro project. All right, let's talk about the structure and routing basics in Astro. Now, when I started with this, it gave us a bunch of stuff in here, and I just want to remove a lot of it because for now, it'll be distracting. So let's get rid of this right here, and we'll come back to that later. Now, inside the index route here, you'll notice that I actually referenced something here, so let's get rid of that as well, and we'll get rid of all of this. And then I'm just going to do a bang, and then I'll use the control and spacebar to go ahead and use just a doc type here, where inside here, we'll just say like home. All right, so now we've got a basic home route. You can see right here. And what I want to do is talk about this SRC directory and now the public directory, because these are the two things that are going to matter for now. The pages directory inside of SRC is the only thing that's required. And you can see that that's because I need some kind of home route. So this is my index route of my site. Now, anything inside of the SRC directory is what Astro can touch. So Astro looks at this SRC directory when it builds your site. The public directory, on the other hand, Astro will simply take and dump at the root of your site. So let's talk about these kind of one after the other. Since the SRC directory only contains this one required folder, pages, and here only one required route of index, let's talk about this as a whole. You can see how Astro uses page routing. So you can see here I've got an index page, but I could also change this to be like an about page as well. And let's change this to say about just so we can see a difference. And I go to about, you'll see now it says about. So this is just automatically creating a route for us. Now, it doesn't have to be an Astro file. It could actually just be an HTML file like this as well. And you'll see that that works just the same. Or it could actually be a markdown file as well. And you don't need all this. You could just come in here and say like about. And you'll notice over here now it says about as well. So Astro files, HTML files, and markdown files inside of the pages directory are automatically created as routes. Now here I've got these kind of top level routes, but you can also nest them inside of directories if you want to. So let's say I had an about directory and I drag this inside here like this. And first of all, it's going to break because what I need to do is now change this to an index.md or index.astro or index.html. And this folder structure will tell it that it's the index at the about route. So your index route is your home route. Any other route, no matter what you name it, will just be whatever it is. And you can also nest these under folders with index instead. Now there is dynamic routing and a couple other things to pay attention to, but we'll look at those later on in the course. I do want you to notice here that even though this is a markdown file and it doesn't have HTML structure around it, Astro will actually wrap it around it by default. So you see it wraps an HTML tag, a head, a body tag, and simply drops in our H1 right here. Once again, there's a way to escape that behavior, but at this basic point, that's all you need to know, as it will take care of that for you if you don't include it. So that's a little bit about the SRC directory. Let's now think about the public directory. Like I mentioned here, this favicon is at the root of the site. Now, to make sure we can actually see this when I go to it, let's change this to black, and I'll come over here. We'll go to favicon.svg, and there it is right here. In fact, if I go ahead and build, so let's get ahead of ourselves a little bit. We'll do npm run build, and come back over here. It will build a dist folder. Now, notice what it's done. I have an index route. I have an about route with an index.html page, and then I also have this favicon just at the root of my site. So anything in the public directory, Astro will not try to minify or touch. It will just take it and dump it at the root of your build. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is this astroconfig.mjs file. We're not going to do anything with this right now, but we will as we go forward throughout this module. This is where you can add integrations and other things to kind of customize how Astro works for you. Just know that it's here and we'll come around to it as we need it. We've talked about the structure of an Astro directory. I now want to talk about the structure of an Astro file. You may have noticed at the beginning that this had this kind of like dashed section up here. This is called the front matter. Everything down here is what's output on the client. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next video. Let's talk about the structure of an Astro file. Here I've got this front matter up top and these little ticks. Now this section right here is build or server-side code. So it's going to be run either when you build your site or if you happen to be using an SSR adapter, which we haven't talked about yet, and somebody hits your page, this will all be done on the server. In other words, this is never client-side code. Down here is where all your HTML will be output. And you'll notice that it looks very much just like HTML because right now that's all it is. So let's talk a little bit about templating down this way. Anywhere down below here in your outputted HTML, you can have any kind of JavaScript expression. Now, this is not a statement in JavaScript like an if statement or something like that, but a mere expression. So for instance, I could say something like 1 plus 2. Not very helpful, but you can see there it's actually doing the JavaScript math right here, right? Now I could also do things like new date, and here do something like locale string, and you can see that now it shows me the date and time as of right now. Again, to do any kind of templating like this, it needs to be inside of these curly brackets. Other than that, everything down this way is essentially just static HTML. Now up top, you can do JavaScript on build or server side. So for instance, I could have a variable, let's call it something like my num. We'll set this equal to 2. Now, I can actually take something from up here, and I can go ahead and template it out down this way. So I could say my num, just like that, and you'll notice that it says 2. Now, once again, I could do like math on this as well, so I could add 3 to it or do whatever I want. And in fact, because I have the Astro extension installed, if I go ahead and do dot, it'll actually show me methods associated with numbers, right? So I could pick any of these because it knows that it's a number. Now, the same thing would be true of a string. So let's say my string. In this case, I'll do something like hi, and I can come down this way, and I'll just do my string. And you see it shows up over this way. Now, not to belabor the point, but we could also have something like a Boolean. So let's have this, we'll call it true. And then down here, I can just say my bool, and it should show as true. Now, of course, where this gets really powerful is when you have more complex structures. So for instance, let's have an object up this way. And then let's go ahead and get rid of this variable so it won't yell at us, because this object now has a nested structure. It's got some properties like strings, it's got this number, it's got an array, it's also got another object kind of nested inside of it. So what I can do is come over here and simply add this and say something like .name. And notice how Astro knows the type of those things. That also means I could do something like to locale lowercase, and it knows that it's a string and can use that method on it. Now, of course, this means I can also get more nested in here as well. So let's grab the address, dot again, we'll go to the city, and I can just pick off individual properties of this object wherever I need it. Now the same would be true if I used an array. So let's simplify this a little bit. We'll just say something like Chris and Nicole. And now what I want to do is loop over this array. Now if you're used to working with something like React, you're probably used to JSX, and this is very similar in its syntax. If you're not, no problem at all. All we're going to do is map over these items. Now this array method in JavaScript allows you to do something for each item in the array. I'll just call this person, and what I want is for each person to be inside of a paragraph tag. Again, because I'm templating, this needs to be in curly brackets, and I'll just call it person because that's what I called it right over here. And notice I've got Chris and I've got Nicole. Again, not to belabor the point, but it does know that this is a string, which means I've got all the different methods available. So to lowercase, once again, will work for us. Now, of course, this is only so useful. You could, of course, have local data up here and then pick it off as you need. But where it really gets powerful is importing data from elsewhere. So let's get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of this as well. And let's go ahead and open up the sidebar. And I want Astro to be able to touch these files. Now, because of that, it needs to be inside of the src directory. And I'm going to just create a new folder. We'll call this data, although you could call it whatever you want. And I'm going to come in here. We're just going to have something like people.json. And here I just pasted in an array of people. And you can see that it's got a lot of the same things we saw in the front matter earlier. Now, what I can do is import this in this front matter section. So I'll say import. We can call it whatever we want. So I could call it people. I could call it data. Let's just call it people since that's what it is. And then I just want to do this from, and I can go up the directory to the data, and then I'll find people.json. So you can import TS files, JS files, JSON files, YAML files, whatever you want data-wise, and pull this in. And now Astro actually knows the shape of the data. So I'll say people dot, and notice it's an array, and it knows that it's an array. So I could map over that. And each of these are people, so let's call them persons. And now I'm simply going to output some HTML. Now again, because we're templating, remember we need to put this inside of curly brackets. So I would just say person dot, and then I've got all those items available. And again, it knows the type because I've imported it. And so Astro tells me what that type is. Now, if you want to output multiple things in a map, you can do one of two things. You can either use the normal curly brackets and return here whatever structure that looks like, or what's more normal is to wrap this whole thing in parentheses and then down here have multiple children. So let's have both their names listed out. That's not super helpful right now, but we could say .age. I think that was one of them. Because it's a number, I should probably do toString, although the browser should do that for me anyhow. So now I've got their names and their ages. Now, if you're used to working with JSX with React, you're going to notice a couple of differences here. I do not need a key because this isn't live data. In fact, when I build, it will just statically build based off of this file, and that will be baked into the HTML. So I don't need to be live updating it, so I don't need a key. I also don't need a single parent. I can have multiple siblings right next to each other, no problem at all. So we've talked about basic templating down here. We've taken stuff from the front matter, including imported data locally, and we've output it down below. But you actually don't even need the data inside of your project. You can do this from anywhere on the web. So I'm going to come over here to JSON placeholder. This is a nice little like mock API. And I'm just going to grab this to do right here. What I want to do is import this directly in the front matter. So I'm just going to say const, we'll call this res equals, and normally you'd have to wrap this in some kind of async function. However, this whole section up here is actually wrapped in an async function for you, which means you can do await, top level, right there. So I'll just await fetch, and I'm going to fetch that to do. Anytime you're fetching JSON data like that, you're going to need to grab it. So I'll say wait, this will be res.json, and that should give this back to me in a format that I can actually use, right? It'll actually be a JavaScript object. So let's come over here, let's get rid of all this, and now I can simply grab the data dot. Now in this case, it doesn't actually know what the data looks like. So what I want to do before I actually do that is go ahead and console log this. And that way we can see what the data looks like and we know how to template it out down below. So I'll go ahead and save this, come back over here and refresh. Now think about it. Where is this going to show? Is this console log going to show server side or is it going to show over here on the client? Well, remember all this is done on build or server side. So it should show right over here and you'll notice that's exactly what it does. So I've got data here with a user ID, an ID, a title, and completed state. So what I'm going to do now that I know that is come over here, we'll do data.title, and I could also type this with TypeScript if I want. Right now I'm not going to do that, but you can see that here it's actually showing the title for me. Now once again, by default, Astro is statically rendered, which means this will only work on build. It's not going to be live data. So let's come over here and I'm just going to npm run build this just so we can see what this looks like. If I come over this way, this will be a dist folder. I've got my index route and notice it's just baked this directly into the HTML. So when it built, it grabbed everything from this front matter and then placed it down below where needed. Now there is a way to make this more dynamic. That's using server-side rendering, and we'll talk about that later in the course. But for now, note that the default behavior is that everything is static. So when it's built, that's when everything is kind of baked into your HTML in stone. Now, if you've been thinking here, you'll notice that there's some kind of complexity we've got going on. I've got this HTML tag right here. I've also got an HTML tag over here. Well, it's an index route, but either way, it's a separate route, right? So if I come over here like this is a separate route, but wouldn't it be nice if I could have a basic structure and simply slot in content where needed? Well, that's where the concept of layouts comes in, and that's what we'll talk about next. Now, so far we have two routes. We have this about route, and we also have the index route. You can see that right over here. Now, what we want to do is use a layout with a slot to just drop in the content that's different between these two routes, because right now there's only one thing that's different, which is this right here, right? Whatever we put inside the body. Now to start with, I'm going to just go ahead and get rid of this about folder. We'll just duplicate the index route for now. I'm going to actually change this to just say home. That way we've got something consistent to show. I'll get rid of this front matter section because we're not going to need that right now. Then I'm going to duplicate this. We'll call this about and change this to say about. All right, so now you can see they really very much are the same with just one word that's different between them. So let's use layouts to make this a little bit more dry. So we're not going to reuse that code so much. I'll come over here, and again, because I want Astro to touch this, this needs to be inside of the src directory. We're simply going to call this thing layouts. Now you don't have to call it layouts, but that's what's done by convention, so that's what I'm going to do. And we'll come over here, I'm just going to call this base layout.astro. Now, what I want to do is copy all this code right here, and I just want to drop it into the base layout. Now, the only thing that's different is this section right here, which is where I can use this next concept of slots. So just like this, I want the slot to be right here, which means any Astro route or component that uses this can drop content right here. Now, I need to actually use this in these other routes. So let's come over here. I'm going to get rid of all this for now. We're just going to say base layout, and the Astro extension should show that for you. If it doesn't, use Control and Spacebar to open that up, and then you can import that up top here. Now, just like with any HTML tag, I can actually wrap my content and anything inside of here. So like if I do an H1 that says home, this will be dropped directly in the slot. So let's go ahead and copy this. I'm going to drop this over this way. We're just going to change this out to say about. So now we have this reusable component, base layout, that then has this one slot area where I can drop in different content. Now here's the nice part. Let's close down the sidebar. I might also want some other content in here, right, that I want on every single page. So maybe let's wrap this first of all in a main tag, and then I might want a nav, right? So I'll come in here, and this points to the home route, so I'll do that. Come down here, and this might point to about. Now notice, as soon as I do that, I now have a little nav bar where I can go to the home, and about, and the home, and about, and this exists on both pages because it exists in the parent wrapper. The slotted content goes right here, everything else shows up this way. Now, so far we've just been working with a default slot. I could, however, come in here and give this thing a name. So let's say I say this is content or something like that. Now, the first thing you're going to notice is that once I name a slot, because I do not have a default slot anymore, this content doesn't know where to go. So if I want this to be part of that content, the content slot, I actually have to come over here and provide the slot and then give it the name that I gave it over there, right? This was content. And now it should show up over here. However, the home route doesn't have that. So obviously you probably would use this on some kind of wrapper. So I use it occasionally for like sidebars and things like that. But if I came over here and I did something like, oh, this is slot content, right? So we'll just change the class to say slot. You'll notice that now anything I put inside of here, so I can have a paragraph that says hi, this will all show up inside of this slot. Now, typically, at least for me, if I'm using a slot, I don't want to just have named slots. I want to have at least one default slot. So if I come back over here, and let's say we have that name slot, but I also have a default slot, right? Then the home route can still drop stuff in that default slot. The about route can drop it right here. Now, in this case, they look the exact same, but you could imagine with styling that you might style this content a little bit differently in this slot than you would in kind of the main area. So maybe it's a sidebar or something like that. For now, though, let's just stick with a default slot. That's mostly what I use anyhow, but I wanted to let you know about that one little feature. So I'll come back over here and let's get rid of this right here, and we'll just have about once again. Now, this is nice that it's reusable and we can drop stuff in, but there's one more thing that would make this a lot better. You can see I've got this about route, but it just says document. And over here, this just says document as well. So let's come over here to the base layout. What I want to do is replace this dependent on which component, or which route in this case, calls this base layout. This is where the concept of props comes in. Now, we're going to talk about this in the next lesson, but I want to give you a little preview right now. Because we're templating out, we need to use the curly brackets. And here I can reference props with the uppercase Astro dot props dot whatever the name of the prop happens to be. This will be passed on as an object, which we'll see in a second. Now over here, to actually use it, I have to pass it into the prop in the front tag. So I can just say title is about, and that should work over here. And if I come over this way, I could say title is home. Now notice automatically this says home, over here says about. Now, typically, if you're using a lot of props in a particular component or wrapper like we've got here, you don't want to type astro.props.title over and over again. So usually what you do is you'll come over here and just call this title, and then up top, you'll create this little front matter section, and you'll destructure that from the astro.props object. So we'll say equals astro.props like that. Now this works the exact same way, except I don't have to type this over and over again. You can actually even give this a default. So I could say something like default, and then if I don't include that, so let's not include it right over here, it'll still show as my default, so whatever that happens to be. So usually you'd use this for something like the site title, and that way you always have your site title unless you want to overwrite it in a particular route. Here we're not, and here we are. We've got two link tags, and I might want to make these their own component. That's what we'll do next. That lets me co-locate everything about my link component in one file. It also gives me some special abilities with the styles, which we'll look at as we keep going through this module. Believe it or not, you have everything you need to create your very first Astro component. Now let me give you some help, and then I want you to try it yourself. Again, we want Astro to touch this, so it needs to be in the src directory, and I'm going to create a new directory called components. You don't have to call it that, but again, that's convention, so that's what I'm going to do. Now, what I want you to do is create a link component. So I'll call this link.astro, and in here, I want you to create a link tag that allows you to slot in content and also receive an href as a prop. So see if you can do that, kind of paying attention to what we've done over this way. I want you to slot in content, and I want you to take in a prop for the href. That's your hint. All right, pause the video, do your best, and come right back when you're done. Okay, hopefully you had a good go of that. What I'm going to do is come over here, and all we want to do is add an anchor link right here. And inside here, I'm going to have a slot, or we can put content, for instance, maybe text or an icon. And then here I want an href. Now I could do astro.props.href, but let's go ahead and do this destructure method just to keep it a little cleaner. And I'll grab the href right here, and this will be equal to astro.props. So we'll just destructure that. Now all I have to do is call this over here in my base layout. So I'll come over here, we're going to call this link, and it should pull in. There it does. I'll hit enter, and yep, pulled it in right up here. So now I've got this one that's using my custom component, and this one over here that's not. Now right now they're going to work the exact same, right? Here and here, because I have an href that's being passed in, already it's the same exact structure, so not super helpful. So why would you want to do something like this? Well, there's two things in particular I'd want to point out. Number one, you now know that everything that references a link is going to reference your custom component. But number two, Astro also allows you to scope CSS to a component. So we're going to talk about this in the next lesson, but if I come over here and add a style tag, we say something like all the links in this particular component have a color of red. Now notice here I've got a red link, but this one over here is still the default styling. That's because any style tags inside of an Astro file are scoped to that particular file. Now it's important to note that the actual tags have to be here. But notice I don't have to give this like a special class or anything like that. Just referencing the anchor link, which normally would be like death if you tried to use this in a site because every anchor link would be changed. But here it just scopes it by default. So you don't have to provide some named class or something like that. Just reference it within the same file and it will scope those styles to it. So if I come back over this way, you'll notice this one is that way. Let's go ahead and change this one to be the same. So now they're both going to reference my same link component. Now the cool thing that we'll get into later is you could have different variants here, where you might have one that's like a filled in button or one that's an outlined button. And now all this component itself is going to contain all that styling, the kind of structure that you need. You could even have optional sections that show or don't show, and you could pass all that in as props as well. So by componentizing different sections of your site, it gives you a lot of flexibility, but it also allows you to kind of be limited by your chosen style set and functionality, instead of just kind of doing it off the fly. Then if I want to update anything with my links, I know exactly where to look. This one file contains everything. Now, so far we're just using a style tag on the page, but there are a bunch of other ways to work with CSS in Astro. Let's talk about that next. I hope you feel so empowered having done your very first Astro component, even though it's very simple. Now we're going to talk about styling in this module. We've already mentioned here that style tags within Astro files, they're scoped to that file. I should mention once again that the tag actually has to be present or a class or whatever it happens to be. So you could give this thing a class if you wanted to. We could call it like link or something like that. And then I could come over here and do .link, but it's only .links in this file, not in the slot, but actually in the file that will be referenced. So for instance, if I come over here, let's get rid of this. And now this should no longer be red, right? Because I don't have a .link here. You might think that you could come over here and just say, hey, I know what I'll do. I'll reference, let's see, right over here. I'll have some kind of tag inside here. So let's have something with the class like this, and we'll say like hi. And notice this is not red because it's just part of the slot. It actually has to be referenced from the file itself. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's come back out this way. So this scoped styling is really helpful. Astro actually applies like a data attribute and uses that to style it in your CSS. All right, now we're back to kind of as we started. Let's talk about some other options you've got. You could, of course, just use a style attribute. Now here, this could just be a string like background of black, and that will show right there. You could also use like a CSS and JS style syntax. And here we could say something like background of black. Once again, that would work. Now you can also, with a class, use like a CSS module where you import some kind of style sheet and then pick off a certain class within that, like title or link or whatever it happens to be. All that is built in by default in Astro. Now, in the last several years, the rise of Tailwind and other CSS frameworks has helped people template out sites quicker. And you'll be happy to know if you're a Tailwind dev that it's really easy to get started with Astro. I'm going to come over here and go ahead and kill my dev server and use the npx command. And we'll do astro add Tailwind. Now you might remember I showed you the Astro config file, and this is where that comes in handy, because what I can do is use this nice little helper that will install Tailwind for me. It's going to install all the dependencies that I need. Will actually generate my Tailwind config file for me, and notice it's going to update my astro.config.mjs file. It's going to update it by importing Tailwind and adding it as an integration. We'll talk about more integrations as we go, but that's how nice it is to get started with Tailwind. That's all I have to do. Hey, this is Chris from the future. Just want to jump in real quick and say a couple of things. Tailwind 4 is now out and supported by Astro, so there's just one slight change, and that is the Tailwind config file is now just a CSS file, which means you do have to import it globally, so like in a layout or something like that, just like you would any other global CSS file, and then you can do exactly what I explain in the rest of the video. Okay, back to the video. So that means I could literally come over here and just change this to like text, I don't know, 5XL, and that's a Tailwind class, and notice it just works out of the box. Of course, I've got my Tailwind config if I want to do more to it, but all this is because I've installed that one little package. The astroconfig.mjs, just like we saw in the CLI here, has added this integration, so that way I can use this throughout my project and it knows to look for it. Now lastly, I want to talk about global styles. Now, as we've already mentioned here, this will not be global. If I come back over here, we change this back to a normal anchor link. It's only the one that's in this link component, this one that's referenced here, that will actually get our styling. However, what you can do for these style tags if you want to is make them global with the isGlobal declaration. Now, as soon as I do that, notice this actually picks up the same styling. Now, it's just this styling here, obviously not the class because that's to the component itself, but the style tag is now global. Now, while you can do that, that's not typically what you do for a global style sheet. So let's go ahead and get rid of this declaration right here. And I want to come over here to my base layout. Every page I'm currently using uses this. And anywhere you import a CSS file, it's global for anything in that file, and importantly, anything in the slots or anything that's referenced there. So let's come over here, and inside the SRC directory, again, because I want Astro to touch it, I'm going to create a styles directory. Now, you can name this style sheet whatever you want, but just so I remember that it's global, I typically call it global. So let's call it global.css. And perhaps here, let's just take the body. We'll make this background color something like peach puff. All right, so now we've got this here, but it's not referenced anywhere, so it's not actually working. Now, what I want to do is import this up top, just relatively, so wherever it is in the project. So I'll come up, I know it's in my styles directory, and then it's my global CSS. Now, as soon as I save this, notice that both the home and the about will now take on that styling. Anywhere you import styling, that component and anything inside that component, or that's referenced, even a slot, will take on that styling. So this is typically how I use global styles. Now let's just explore that a little bit. If I come over here and get rid of it in the base layout, I go over to About and I import it over here. Now notice over here on About, it's going to have that styling, but on Home it will not. Let's mix it up. Let's take it over here to our link component and you take your guess. What do you think is going to happen as soon as I import it up here? Well, notice it's going to be on the Home, it's going to be on the About because it's been imported and both of those are used in the base layout. So therefore, they both get this style sheet as well. Anywhere you're importing your style sheet, if that component is used in any other file, it will pull in all that styling. So while technically not all imports are global, typically I think of them that way because I'm only really going to use it if I know exactly where that's going to be referenced, which for me is typically only in my layout files. Now, Astro is smart enough that even though I have two links here, right? A link here, and let's actually create one more link, right? So both of these links, it's only going to reference that style sheet once. It won't pull it in 2 times. In fact, I can see that if I come over here and do npm run build. Let's come up to my dist, and I've got my index right here, and notice that I've got this one style sheet showing right here. This underscore Astro shows me this one CSS file, which happens to contain all my Tailwind classes, but it also contains the link wherever that's at right here, right? And notice, as we mentioned before, it has this data attribute for the local styles here, but the imported styles, this background color here, is on the body and it's just global. We've got one more video to look at to understand how scripting works. So far, we've understood the structure of an Astro project, the structure of an Astro page, how slots and props work. We've understood styling. Now it's time to understand how to work with JavaScript in Astro. We're almost ready to build out our first little project with Astro, but you need to know one more thing, and that is how to use JavaScript in Astro. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want to look at Peach Puff the rest of my life, so let's come over here to our link and get rid of this import right here. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is where JavaScript is run. Remember, we've got this front matter up here. This is all going to be on build or server side. Now, that means if I come over here and do console.log over here, and I say like hi from server, it should show only on the server logs. And in fact, that's what it does right here. It shows hi from server. Now I could come down here and I could have a script tag just like this. And here I can say hi from client. Now if I jump over here, it should show over here, and it does hi from client. So knowing where stuff runs is really important. You've got this front section that will run on the server. You've got this bottom section over here that's going to run on the client. Now, importantly down here, this is all going to be modularized by Astro. So it's an actual module, which means you can import directly here. It also has TypeScript built in by default if you're using TypeScript. So let's close down some of these things. I'm going to come over here to the index route, and I want to add in a script tag right here. Here, let's go ahead and reference our heading. This will just be our H1. And I want this to be document.querySelector. And we're just going to reference the tag H1. And again, I can type this, so I can say as unknown, and then as HTML heading element. And you see I've got built-in TypeScript right here. Now let's go ahead and say that anytime I click on my heading, so let's add an event listener for click, I simply want to add a console log in here, console.log, and we'll say like clicked on heading. All right, so right over here, you'll notice that if I click on this home, let's go over here. If I click on home, it'll say clicked on heading. Now you might remember that with our style tags, remember those are scoped. These script tags are simply put on the page wherever you put them. So in this case, technically they're within the slot, right? If I come back over to my base component, my base layout over here, they're all put right here between the main tags. Now it used to be with Astro 4 and earlier, you could put them anywhere and Astro would just hoist them up to the head no matter what. Now you just need to make sure that they're inside of your body because they'll appear wherever you put them. Now here we put this on the index route. So if I come over here and click on this home, I'm referencing just the first heading that exists with the H1 tag, which there should only be one. If I come over to the about page and I click over here, you would expect there not to be anything logged, right? Now that's not because it's scoped, it's simply because Astro is smart about where it imports this module. It knows it's only used on this page, so we'll only use it there. Let's, however, come back over here and let's open back up my link. And even though I wouldn't normally do this, I could have a separate script tag with heading here, even though that's not even in this component at all. And you'll notice that because it's used on both pages, since it's used in the layout, if I come and click on about now, it says clicked on heading. So it's important to note that the scripts are not like scoped. They're simply used wherever you use them on the site. In this case, I'm using it in the link. If I come over here, I would only be using it on the index route. So for that reason, you need to know where these things are being used because the entire module will be imported on whatever route or component you're using it in. So it's important to know where you're importing these, where you're using these files, because this module will be imported anywhere that that file is used. In this case, it happens to be a page route, but over here, you can see that this was just a component, and I accidentally, essentially, referenced that script without meaning to. Now, by default, Astro ships no client-side JavaScript. So the only way to actually do client-side JavaScript is down here in a script tag. Now, so far, we've just been writing everything inside of here, but you can actually import stuff as well. So let's say I came over here and I had like a paragraph that had a ID of copyright. All right, so I might want to add like a copyright year directly in here. Now over here, what I want to do is come inside again the SRC directory. We're going to create something called lib. All right, this is our little library of helpers. We'll just call this utils.ts. You don't have to use TypeScript. I just happen to be right now. You could also use JavaScript. But what I want to do is create a little helper function here that I can import into my index route. So this is a function we'll call like get copyright year. And it's not going to take in anything. All it's going to do is return a new date, and then we'll just use the get year. Now let's go ahead and export this like this, export function, so that way we can import get copyright year directly in here. And here we'll just import that single function that we need. This will be from, I'm going to go up to my lib, and then will be our utils. Now it should know which things are exported from there, and it does, get copyright year. So that means I could come over here, we'll store this in something like year equals get copyright year. And now on page load over on the home page, if I console log this, you'll see it says year is 2024. So of course I could use that here, document.query selector, copyright. Let's just go ahead and store this in something called copyright. And I'll type this as unknown and as an HTML paragraph element. Now I should be able to come over here and take my copyright.text content, and I should be able to set this equal to year, although again, TypeScript tells me that this should be a string. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, again, this is all going to be done client side. If I wanted to just make sure that on build it had the right copyright year, I wouldn't have to do any of this, right? All I'd have to do, let's go ahead and steal it from right here, is take this and drop it in right over here inside of template tags, and then I'd probably want to turn this into a string. That means if I get rid of the script tag, it no longer needs to run. This is done essentially on build, but it won't be live, whereas this will be live after page load. After page load, it will then run all this and update whatever I happen to have here. Now you can see that if I change this to like 2000 or something and come over here and remove this, it'll start at 2000, and as soon as I save, it'll switch over to 24. That's because client side JavaScript is actually taking over and dropping it in right here. Now, I don't need this as a number. There you go, as a string. Now there's just one other thing I want to mention about script tags. Just like with style tags, you can add extra things here. We had the is global for styles. Here we have is inline. Now what this does is it does not let it be a module. You can see it loses TypeScript support as well. So I can't import, I can't use TypeScript, and it's actually not going to touch it at all. So it's just going to drop it in exactly as you write it. But this can be helpful if you're working with like third-party scripts that you don't want Astro to touch and try to modularize for you. That can mess you up. So if you need that, you can use the is inline declaration here. All right, you've got everything you need now to get started with your very first Astro project in the next video. Okay, I hope you're ready for your very first Astro project. We're going to use UI Design Daily as our inspiration right here, and what we want is just to create a simple card component. Now, there are many components embedded inside here if we want. For instance, we've got this little badge component. We've also got this avatar section right here. The avatar itself could be its own component. I mean, technically, each one of these things could be. So it's kind of up to you where you want to break this down. Typically, what I do is if I'm going to apply something like a badge elsewhere in my site, then it's worthy of its own component. If it's only going to be used here, then it's probably not worth that hassle. So I'll let you do whatever you want, but I do want to point out a couple of things. In the description, you're going to find links to 3 images and 3 people. All right, it's not the exact same people or images, but I did go ahead and use the same text right here as well, because there's also a JSON file. Now, you can do this however you want, but you should have everything you need to import that data and then create the components you need, import the pictures you want as well. Now, the way I've got it set up currently is that all of the pictures are simply at the root of the site. That means if you want to access them, you need to put them in the public directory. We've talked about that already, that Astro won't touch those. They'll simply be sitting there at the root of your site, so you could reference them each that way. Now, Astro does give you a lot of power around pictures. We'll explore that in later modules, but for now, you can just drop them in the public directory. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'm going to do this from scratch with you. So let's come over here. I'm going to do npm create Astro at latest. We'll just call this lesson 9. Now I'll use the basic minimal starter, and I'll install the dependencies, a new Git repository, and then just like that, I'll cd into lesson 9, and then I'll go ahead and open it up in my code editor. Depending on how you have your machine set up, you may need to trust the authors. I'll go ahead and do that. Now what I want to do is add all the images directly here in the public directory. I'm also going to reference that data file, but I need to reference it from within Astro, which means I need to put it somewhere inside of this src directory. To get started with though, let's go ahead and just get rid of all this so we can start from scratch once again. We'll get around to building all that out as we need to. Now this index route will have a problem for now, so let's get rid of everything inside here and just replace it here with an HTML document. For me, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to add my images in the public. I'm going to add my data in a data folder. All right, so there are my 6 images and my data should be here as well. Okay, so we've got everything I need over here. Let's go ahead now and scaffold this out. Now the way I'm thinking about this, if I jump back over here so we can see what's going on, I'm going to have this whole thing be its own component. I'll call something like card. So let's go ahead and create that to start with. There are lots of different ways to build this project out, so just because you do it differently doesn't mean you've done it worse than me. In fact, you may have done it better. So we'll have components over here, and I'm going to call this card.astro. Now what I want to do is for each item in my data file right over here, I want to pass it to that card component. So let's come back over here, and I just want to import that up top, which means I need this front matter section. So I'm going to use import. We'll just call it data, and I'll grab it from going up, my data, and then it'll be my data.json. Now, Astro should know the shape of this data, but all I want to do is pass each of these items over to my card. So let's go ahead first of all, and we're just going to, in curly brackets, since we're doing templating, I'm going to take my data.map, and for each of these, I'm just going to call them cards. I'm going to pass them to my card component. Now, if Astro doesn't show this, you can do Control and Spacebar to import that up there. That should have pulled it in right there. And I wanted to just simply close out this tag. Now, I'm not going to have a slot. I'm actually going to pass everything I need directly in it. So I don't need to have like a starting tag and then an ending tag because I'm only going to pass props and do everything else inside of that. So I could just call this like data, and I'll just feed this my card. So the data is the name of the prop. The card is the item I'm looping through. So I'm going to loop through this card and pass it to my card component. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, over this way, I have yet to receive that. So if I try to receive it over here, nothing's going to happen. Now, to actually see it work, first of all, we need to make sure that we're running, which we're not. So npm run dev, that should help us. And that should pull up right over here. Now, I need to find a way to pull in that data. So let's do that up top here. And you might remember I can destructure that. And we just called it data. So that's what I'll call it here from astro.props. Now down below, just to make sure we can see something, I'm going to call this data dot, and it doesn't give me IntelliSense because I'm kind of passing this along, so I'd have to actually type that, which we're not going to worry about right now. So right now, I'm just going to call it title because I think, yeah, that was the name of the particular property. So all 3 of those are now being passed along. So let's come back over here. You'll notice that this is what I'm doing. I'm looping over each item in my data. That data is right here. And for each of those items, I'm passing the entire object to this component called card. Now, because I don't have a slot, I'm not like injecting it in it. I'm just going to give it all the data and let the card do all the templating. So I've called this card on each iteration. I've given it the name of data, and then I've passed it in right here. That means over here on the card, I need to actually reference that name, data, and pull it in over this way. Then I've got reference to all the items I need. Now, if we look at the actual structure of the card, I've got an image up top, then I've got the rest of the stuff down below. So why don't we mimic that same structure? So I'm going to use the article tag since this is an individual item like this. And up top here, we're going to have an image. Then down below here, we'll have all the content. So I'm just going to give this the class of content. Now, I'm not going to worry a ton about styling in this particular module. We'll do some basic styling, but I really want to focus in on the actual templating out of the component. Now let's move this over so I can actually see what I have. Let's pull up the data and let's get the full screen here. So I've got the author, the title, the description. And if I remember right from our image a second ago, I've got the badge right here. So we'll call this badge. And this should be my data dot category. And this is probably better as like a paragraph tag or something like that. So let's do that. And next I've got my title. So let's just actually keep this as a paragraph tag for now because I don't know exactly where this will be in my site. I'm just going to have this be data.title. Let's copy this down and we'll change both of these to data.description. I think that was next. And then let's see if I can see what's going on over here. The last part is just that avatar section. Now that I think I'll extract out to its own component. That way we get the chance to pass props once more. I've just got the image on the left. Then I've got the name and the number of like how long ago it's been. Before we get around to that though, let's go ahead and make sure the image is pulled in right here. Now since I'm referencing it here, just car.jpg, it's at the root of my site and it's in my public directory, I can actually reference it the same way right here. So this would just be data.hero. And then the alt here, I probably want to have whatever the title is or some other alt description. I don't provide that here. So for now, I'll just go ahead and give it the same as the title. So we'll say data.title, and that should pull that in. So let's close this down for now, move this over, and jump over here to see what we've got. And notice I've got a lot coming in already, right? I've got the badge, the title, the description, and the image. I guess that's backwards, right? But down below, eventually now we need to pull in the picture, the avatar of the person. Now, I did notice that I didn't actually include the data I need. So if I come back over here, there's a couple things you may want to add. This 2 hours ago, yesterday, and December 23rd, 2019. Now, it kind of depends on how you want to do this. If you want to do it the JavaScript way, you can add these as JavaScript dates and then just use some kind of JavaScript methods to kind of populate this. We're going to keep it real simple and just leave it as strings for now. So let's go ahead and open back up the data.json, and I'll come inside here. We'll add like time or something like that. So time. For this first one, we'll say 2 hours ago. And then let's go ahead and copy this down. I'll do comma, same down here. We'll say yesterday. And then one more time, December 23rd. Okay, so now we've got what we need there. So I'm going to need the time, I'm going to need the author name, and the avatar. So let's create another component. I'll come inside here. We'll call this something like author.astro. And here, structure-wise, I'm going to have an image. And then next to it, I'll have another div with the content I have. This will be a paragraph where I'll eventually put the author in here. So we'll just put that there. And then down below, I'll also put in, let's see, the time, right? Up top here, I probably want to have the image. I think we called that avatar, maybe. And actually, I think this was name. All right, so before we get ahead of ourselves, let's actually get the data in here, right? So I know I need front matter because I'm accepting props. And I can pull in all those things separately or kind of all as a group. Now, because they're each individual items, I'm probably going to pull them in separately because that's how they come into the card component, data.author, data.whatever. So let's go ahead and come over here, and I'm going to grab the avatar, the name, and the time. These will eventually all come from astro.props once I pass those in. And once again, let's get a little bit more room. So now I actually have this author component. What I want to do, also probably is throw the name in here, right? Because it's that person. What I want to do now is reference that in this other component. So we've actually got nested components now. Index is just passing it to the card component. The card component is rendering most of it. And then just down below here, we're going to have the avatar or the author component we pull in. So if I start to type, the Astro extension should give that to me. And now it's going to require a few things. I've got the name. This is going to be my data dot, let's just check it real fast, author.name. I've also got my avatar. This should be avatar like this. And this will come from the author.avatar. And then finally, I've got my time. This should come from data.time. Now, as soon as I do this and hit save and jump over this way, there you go. You see all of it coming in for us automatically. So we've really already got everything we need. Right, so all we have left is just styling. Now, I'm not really focusing on styling in this course, so I'll let you do that however you want. Just remember how you can scope styles or import them globally or use Tailwind, whatever you want, but now you've got the data in here. And that's really what we are focusing on. Now, if you got overwhelmed building out these components, don't worry. The next module is all about components. So I'll see you there.